Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment to ask you to check me out on Patreon. There are several tiers with great benefits, including ad-free episodes delivered early to patrons. You can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com through Buy Me a Coffee or through e-transfer at crwbaird@gmail.com. Donations help keep the show going. I've also released my first history book, Canada's Main Street, the epic story of the Trans-Canada Highway. You can find it in most bookstores in Canada and through online retailers. You can find the links for Patreon, donating, and my book in my show notes. Okay, let's get to the show. This summer, the National Trust for Canada is hosting the Every Place Communicates a Story photo challenge contest, and they're inviting Canadians to capture historic places through their camera lens. I'll have a link where you can learn more about the contest in my show notes. But the contest got me thinking about the John and Olive Diefenbaker house in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. It's a National Historic Site and was the home of our 13th Prime Minister for 50 years. But long before he reached the highest office in the land, there was a woman traveling ahead of him into prairie towns. She gathered local stories, she edited speeches, drove him to meetings, and helped transform a shy lawyer into the political force of nature he became. Sadly, she never got to see him take office and was relegated to becoming a footnote in his story. I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X, and today I'm putting a school teacher from Saskatchewan in the spotlight to shine a light on a woman who helped build a political legend. This is Grace, Service and Strength, the Edna Diefenbaker story. In the 1970s, John Diefenbaker wrote a 3-volume memoir about his life. In total, there are 937 pages. And do you know how many times he mentions his first wife, Edna? 3 times. So, let's change that. Her story begins at the dawn of European colonization of North America. Edna Brouwer was of Dutch heritage. Her paternal ancestor settled in New Amsterdam, now New York, in 1630. Her maternal ancestry was Norwegian, and they arrived in Canada in the mid-1800s. Now, her father Chauncey grew up in Kingston, Ontario, but dreamed of eventually going west to live the life of the adventurers he read so much about. In May 1869, when he was only 15, he threw his school books into a hedge and left Kingston forever to wander through western North America for a decade. His parents never saw him again. By 1880, he was in Fargo, North Dakota, where he met a young woman by the name of Marin. The two fell in love, and on November 18, 1882, they married. The couple quickly moved north to Manitoba, and from 1884 to 1890, they had 4 sons. One of them, William, tragically died in 1893 while playing outside on a very hot day. Doctors diagnosed him with brain fever, what we would call heat stroke today. Soon after William's death, another child was born, Jack. Now at the time they lived in Wawanesa, Manitoba, and their neighbor, Lita Mooney, often helped babysit the Brouwer children with her granddaughter, Nellie. Nellie Mooney grew up to become Nellie McClung. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because she led the campaign to get women the right to vote in Alberta and Manitoba, and is one of the famous 5 who fought the Persons case in the late 1920s. And in 1899, another child entered the Brouwer family, and this time it was a girl. On November 30th of that year, Edna Brouwer was born. As the only daughter in the family, Edna was the apple of her mother's eye. From the moment she was born, her mother made her clothing that was fit for a prairie princess, and throughout her youth, she wore wonderfully made outfits stylized in the latest fashion. Her father also did his part to make Edna feel special. He built her custom furniture, including a chair built smaller than the others so it would fit her slight frame. And she adored that chair, and she made it her throne from which she watched her brothers wrestle around the living room. And by all accounts, she was happy. But it was all nearly cut short in the winter of 1901-02 when the young child would spend hours in her chair with the family cat Fluffy, but each day she seemed to grow weaker. Edna was just not herself. Her parents consulted a doctor who couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. He advised them to get rid of Fluffy because of an old superstition that cats drain the energy from children. First, they took the cat off Edna's lap, but each time she got up to get her furry friend. If she didn't, the cat just ran back to her arms anyways. One night, while Edna slept, Fluffy was taken from her for good. Edna was crushed at the loss and desperately searched for Fluffy for days. It was to no avail. But by the spring, Edna's condition began to improve and she returned to her old self. No one knew what exactly caused her sudden decline or her rebirth of her energy. I can tell you what didn't either. Fluffy. So let's take a minute here. Justice for Fluffy. With the mystery illness behind her, and while keeping Fluffy in her heart, Edna resumed her childhood, where she was known to make quick friends out of anyone in the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual for her to walk up to a stranger and say, "Hi, I'm Edna," and then hug their leg or shake their hand. In 1903, the family moved west to a farm on a homestead near Saskatoon, and Edna fell in love with the area almost immediately. The freedom of the wide-open skies and the train that would slow down as it crossed the land. And because there was a steep grade on the property, the train had to slow down, giving Edna and her brothers a chance to jump on for a quick and free ride into Saskatoon. She also developed a love of horses and rode one to school whenever she could. And her favorite thing to do was to break a horse. Once she managed to get them under her control, she would then gallop from farm to farm. Gladys Young was friends with Edna during this time and said, "Edna was just full of fun, wide awake, an all-round person." When Edna finished school, her options were limited because she was a woman, but she was outgoing and friendly, and being a teacher was a natural fit. She trained at the normal school, which is now called the E.A. Davies Building in Saskatoon, and for over 4 decades it served as a teaching training center from which thousands of teachers entered classrooms across the province, and Edna was one of them. She graduated and became a teacher in a one-room school northwest of Saskatoon, and Edna was away from her family and just 18 years old when she entered the Highworth School, but she was happy. Her students remembered her for her kindness, her smile, and how well she dressed. Highworth was followed by the Rosetown Public School in southwest Saskatchewan, where she was joined by her friend Helen Lawrence. One of Edna's students, Margaret Shaw, remembered them well, saying, "They were real party girls. They lived in a hotel room, and when they leaned out the window, the boys gathered underneath like flies. They loved fun and were just bubbling with all of it all the time." In late 1919, Edna was offered a job at the Mayfair School in Saskatoon, and on February 1st, 1920, she had her first day, and just like before, she immediately became popular with staff and students alike. She dreamed up innovative projects to stimulate interest in the classroom and broaden the kids' horizons. And Edna also got the attention of men. In Saskatoon, she had many suitors wanting to marry her, but she turned all of them down until around 1926 when Eddie Burke asked, and she accepted. He was described as fashionable, handsome, and one of the most eligible bachelors in Saskatoon. Eddie owned a car dealership and he presented Edna with a large diamond ring. And during their engagement, she also met a young lawyer named John Diefenbaker. Intelligent, somewhat handsome, and extremely driven, John had recently broken off his engagement to a woman named Beth Newell. The two had been close to marriage when Beth contracted tuberculosis just before Christmas 1924. Beth told John about her illness, and he made a date to meet her at the Five Corners in Saskatoon, which was within walking distance for John. Beth, however, would have to take 3 streetcars and 2 transfers just to meet him, but she made the trek to her beloved. She waited all night for John to show up, but he never did. He never called her again, and she died months later. Oof, that is not a great look for old Diefenbaker. 2 years later, in 1926, when John and Edna crossed paths, he was already engaged to a new woman, but that didn't stop them from chatting. Then they bumped into each other at the train station or at dances, and every time they stopped to chat as the conversations lingered longer and longer. No one knows exactly when the couple became serious, but by mid-1927, their growing friendship crossed into romance. Edna realized she was in love with John, and it didn't help that Eddie was often away on business, so by late 1927, she broke things off with her fiancé. He took it well, telling her to keep the ring because he only wanted her to be happy. He said he would love her until the day he died. And he meant it too. He never married, and he died a bachelor. As for John, he showed a pattern that was repeating. He ended his relationship without a word of apology or remorse. First he ghosted, then he was cold, and eventually he wrote out Edna from his story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Meanwhile, Edna's friends were perplexed. They couldn't understand why she would be with John. She was outgoing and friendly. He was introverted and aloof. What concerned them the most was that he had an air of arrogance that made it difficult for people to like him. One friend, Molly Connell, said, "His eyes, they just bored right through you. There was never any tenderness or warmth about John Diefenbaker." Her friends often referred to her as Ted, a nickname she had for years, but when John heard it, he demanded they stop it. Despite her friends' concerns, Edna married John on June 29, 1929, and because she was now a wife, she had to quit her job as a teacher. She would soon find a new role: John's political cheerleader. Soon after their wedding, Edna moved in with John. She left her friends behind and traveled north to Prince Albert, where he had his law practice. She made friends quickly. Her husband was a staunch conservative with little love for liberals, but Edna was strictly nonpartisan in all of her friendships. When she arrived, she met and became close friends with Betty Davis. Her husband, Ted, was a newspaper reporter respected for his impartiality. And while the couple got along great with Edna, John refused to speak to them because he didn't like Ted's editorials. Betty said, "We would meet John and Edna on our way down to dinner in the hotel. Edna would always stop to chat. John would look right past us and keep walking. Edna would walk with us, always friendly and warm, and John would be walking ahead by himself." Despite his abrasive personality, Edna was deeply in love with John. She saw past that hard exterior to the sometimes caring man underneath, even if that caring side was hard to find. John loved Edna as well, but there seemed to be two things he loved more. First, his mother. She always prioritized him while ignoring John's tender-hearted father. As a result, John nearly always put his mother ahead of his wife. If she needed him, he would drop Edna to see her, and she was no fan of Edna's and treated her like a guest in her own home when she came to visit. And the second thing John loved more than Edna was himself, and he always had been set on a political career. In 1920, he ran for village council in Wacow, Saskatchewan, and was elected to a 3-year term. 5 years later, when he was living in Prince Albert, Diefenbaker ran in his first federal election. He finished in third place, almost 2,000 votes behind the winner, and was a Liberal. Only 1 year later, in a by-election, he once again attempted to get to Parliament. This time, he was running against Liberal Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. He lost that election too. Now, fun fact, that 1926 election in Prince Albert was the only time in Canadian history that two prime ministers, former, current, or future, ran in the same riding. Now, as you know, all those losses didn't stop John. And 20 days leading up to his wedding, he lost again in the Saskatchewan election to the incumbent, Thomas Davis. Remember how Edna's friends didn't like him? Well, it was a wider problem. John Diefenbaker was not super likable. He was loud, rude, and arrogant. We know that John Diefenbaker made a lot of mistakes, starting with being kind of awful to his exes, but also Avroero. But one thing he got right was marrying Edna, because she became his political tipping point. Edna told John that he could win office, but he had to change. So she edited his speeches to help tone down his rhetoric, and told him he couldn't be abrasive with voters. She encouraged him to be socially conscious, and as much as he despised it, that meant he had to network and mix with people at events. When he spoke at events in the area, Edna drove while John sat in the back seat going over his notes. She would also mingle and meet people and use her outgoing, likable nature to learn about issues and then relay those to John to help him be more relatable. His opening remark even came from her. At each stop he said, "Meet my chauffeur. She may kill me before the election with her speed, but she's a wonderful driver." Now, without Edna, John's man-of-the-people persona would have never developed. But it came at a cost. Edna had always wanted children, but John wanted a political career without quote-unquote brats to take her focus away from him. She played tennis, badminton, and other sports, but with him she stayed at home because he wanted nothing to do with any of those things. She only socialized like she used to when he was away, and that was until he summoned her to him whenever that might be. Then she had to drop everything to be at his side. Now, some of John's friends began to believe that Edna refused to let her husband out of her sight, when in truth, it was the other way around. Now, Edna's influence and efforts came to fruition in 1933 when John ran to be the mayor of Prince Albert. He still lost, but the margin was smaller, only 30 votes. He was gaining ground. 5 years later, he attempted to win a seat in the Saskatchewan legislature. He lost again, but this time by only 190 votes. By 1940, Edna's hard work finally paid off when John won a seat in Parliament. His dream of a successful political career was finally coming true, and Edna was making it happen. The Diefenbakers were going to Ottawa. John and Edna boarded a train for Ottawa on May 13, 1940. And shortly after their departure from Prince Albert, John retired to his room while Edna went around meeting people. She introduced herself to a man who was a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force. And when James Sinclair told her that he was also heading to Ottawa to work with the government, she responded, "My husband will be of great assistance to you because he is going to be Prime Minister." Sinclair was immediately charmed by her. And here's another point that shows that Canadian history is interconnected like a web. James Sinclair had a daughter named Margaret. She married a hotshot lawyer and Prime Minister named Pierre Trudeau and became the mother to Justin Trudeau, who you will know as Katy Perry's boyfriend. When Edna arrived in Ottawa, she was still by John's side as often as she could be. Most days you could find her in the visitors' gallery at the House of Commons, and while on Parliament Hill she forged friendships with the press gallery, which helped get John national coverage in newspapers and on radio. And before long, other members of Parliament fell under her spell, including members of all parties, who didn't like John, but they loved Edna. Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King even said that if he had met Edna before John, he would have married her instead. It seemed that no door was ever closed to Edna. Everywhere she went in Ottawa, she was welcomed and was John Diefenbaker's biggest cheerleader. Until she wasn't. By 1945, something was beginning to change in John and Edna's relationship. She was now in her mid-40s and perimenopause was upon her, and with it came a depression she just couldn't explain. When Parliament was not in session, Edna would return home and spend time walking alone on rural roads. And when she visited her mother, they conversed quietly in a locked room. And by the time the federal election campaign began in April 1945, she was still John's chauffeur to meetings and speaking events, but she wasn't feeding him information or trying to soften his image. She didn't even speak to him about her feelings, and she resented that he seemed oblivious to her depression. She was plagued with anxiety and hair loss, which she covered with fashionable hats. And crowds started to bother her as well, but John still insisted she be by his side on the campaign trail. John won his riding in the June 1945 election, and Edna returned to Ottawa with him to see the opening of the 20th Canadian Parliament. She attended some events and then, quite simply, vanished from the social scene. In the search for answers, Edna went to visit a doctor friend in Saskatoon who sent her to a specialist in Toronto. On September 24, 1945, Edna was admitted to the Homewood Sanatorium in Guelph. When people asked John about Edna, he was elusive and gave half answers, but never told the truth. In the 1940s and even today, there's a stigma attached to a mental health crisis. Of course, part of his secrecy was tied to his first love and priority, his political career. He feared how it would look if people found out that his wife was in a mental health facility. At Homewood, Edna was prescribed shock treatment, but she refused. But John ignored her wishes, and she received 10 to 14 shock treatments during the 5 months in treatment. Finally, on March 24, 1946, Edna returned home. And as soon as she did, John dropped the bombshell on her. He wanted to have a child. Edna was flabbergasted at the suggestion, considering he was 50 and she was 46. She said, "For goodness sake, John, start a family at our age. If we did not have children when we were young, we certainly will not have them now." On the outside, John and Edna projected their image of a happy couple, but behind closed doors, their marriage was fractured. It's hard to come back from your partner allowing shock treatment against your consent, but just like she had before, Edna was by his side during parliamentary sessions to help John as much as she could. In 1948, he attempted to win the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party, and Edna mixed and mingled with people to help his cause. She made friends, made people feel welcome. Unfortunately, John remained rude and awkward and finished a distant second to George Drew. A year later, John went into his third federal election. Edna helped him, but by this point she didn't care if he was re-elected or not. And yet, he won once again. This would be the last of his victories that Edna would witness. In 1950, following the death of former Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King, Edna started to feel like something was off. It started with her eyes. She had difficulty reading. Before long, a general fatigue that she could not shake began to settle in. She visited a doctor while they were in Washington, D.C. at a conference, and he confirmed the worst. She had leukemia and had a limited time to live. But she accepted the diagnosis with common bravery, and her biggest worry was John. On November 9th, the couple departed for a trip to Vancouver as a layover for John, who would continue on to New Zealand, Australia, and eventually Hawaii. Edna would join him in Hawaii in late December. She packed believing she would not return to her Prince Albert home. The couple parted ways with a hug in Vancouver. And during Edna's stay, she was diagnosed with acute leukemia that was progressing quickly. So on December 19, 1950, she traveled to St. Paul's Hospital in Saskatoon, and John cut his trip short to be with Edna. At the hospital, the couple spent their last Christmas together. As news spread that Edna was terminally ill, well wishes, flowers, and cards came in from across Canada. Nearly every premier, member of parliament, and even the Prime Minister, Louis Saint Laurent, sent something. Farmers, railway porters, waiters on trains, and waitresses from the House of Commons all did the same. They all remembered the kind and charming woman who stood at the side of the gruff and angry man. In the press gallery in the centre block of Parliament, a box labelled "For Edna" was stuffed with money to buy flowers and cards. And even as death approached, Edna helped John's career. In January 1951, while she was in the hospital, a man named Alfred Atherton visited her. His son, Jack Atherton, was a telegraph operator with Canadian National Railway. When two trains collided near Canoe River, British Columbia, on November 21, 1950, Jack was blamed for not giving a vital message to the locomotives. Police charged him with manslaughter. Alfred said there was evidence that his son had relayed the telegraph message accurately and that he was being used as a scapegoat in the crash. He had already approached John, but he was turned down. When John came to visit Edna, she told him about Alfred and Jack, and John sympathized, but he said he could not take the case. Edna replied that she had already accepted on his behalf. She never got to see the resolution to the case. A few weeks later, on February 7th, 1951, at 5:17 a.m., Edna died. John went to British Columbia to represent Jack Atherton at his trial on May 9, 1951. In the end, John won an acquittal for his client, and the case became national news, which caused John's fame to skyrocket. This began a groundswell of positivity for John because it helped him win the Progressive Conservative leadership in 1956, followed by the federal election in 1957. Edna never saw John's ascension to Prime Minister, but without her, he would have never made it. 2 years after Edna's death, John married Olive Freeman. And like Edna, she was a political asset. She was by his side while he was Prime Minister from 1957 to 1963. After she died in 1976, she was buried in Ottawa. 3 years later, John Diefenbaker died. As his body was transported by train to Saskatoon for burial, Olive's casket was removed from its resting place and moved there too. No one other than Diefenbaker and his closest advisors knew that John and Olive would be buried next to each other on a spot overlooking the South Saskatchewan River. A few kilometers away from there, Edna is buried in the Diefenbaker family plot. Her casket was placed at the feet of her mother-in-law, who despised her, and 4 feet deeper than any of the other caskets. The plan was that when John died, his body would be placed over top of hers, but that didn't happen. Instead, John's brother Elmer took his place. The only indication that she is buried there is the large gray headstone that includes her name among those buried in the family plot. On the headstone, nearly faded with time, are the words, 1901, Edna May, 1951. They didn't even get her birth year right. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production by Corey Price. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.